I suddenly heard my son, who had been dead for a year, knocking at the door. Mom, it's me. Open the door. What the hell is going on here? I am 69 years old. My only son has been dead for a year. But it was just after 9 o'clock last night. I was watching TV. Suddenly, my son's voice came from outside the door. Mom, I'm home. Open the door. I missed you so much. At that time I thought I was hallucinating, but after a while, the voice came again. It was really my son's voice. I was so scared that I was shaking all over. Because it was raining outside, I was lying in the living room watching TV. Suddenly I heard my son's voice. I immediately pressed the mute button. I thought I had heard it wrong, although it was my son, but it was stormy outside. I was still a little scared inside. I went to the door. By the way, I turned on all the lights in the living room. I asked, "Who are you?" The answer at the door was, "Mother, I am your son. I've missed you so much. It's pouring outside. Open the door and let me in." I'm sure it's my son's voice, but my son passed away a year ago. I organized the funeral myself. But why is he back? The more I thought about it, the more scared I became. I walked from the door to the sofa. I called my daughter-in-law on my cell phone, but no one answered the phone. It took a few more calls before she finally got through. "Come back quickly. My son, he's back. He's right outside the door." My daughter-in-law said, "Mom, did you have another nightmare? Jim has been dead for over a year. You've got it all wrong." I continued, "How could I be mistaken? He's outside the door right now." I was sure over and over again that I had just heard a voice. Then my daughter-in-law finally believed it and said, "Mom, don't open the door yet. I'll be right back." Then there was another knock at the door. He said again from the door, "Mom, it's raining so hard and cold outside. Please let me in first. Don't you miss me?" I quietly went to the door. I was brave enough. I took a look through the door mirror, but I almost fainted, except for his clothes, his side and his eyes, exactly the same as my late son. That's when I heard the phone ringing in the room. It was my daughter-in-law calling. I hurriedly said, "Come back quickly. Your husband is really back." He was at the door now, but it might be raining outside. The signal is not good. I vaguely seemed to hear my daughter-in-law talking, but I couldn't hear her clearly. I was afraid of being alone. I hid in my room and didn't dare to go out. After a while, my daughter-in-law called. She said she was already at the door, asked me to open the door. Then I heard my daughter-in-law's voice in the room. My heart finally dropped. I rushed to open the door, but my daughter-in-law said that when she came back, there was no one outside the door. I didn't believe her. I went out to look again and again, but there was really no one there. When I was turning around to go back to the house, I suddenly saw my son jump out from behind the door, with my sleeping granddaughter in his arms. I didn't expect my son and daughter-in-law to be standing in front of me at the same time. I was overwhelmed by the scene in front of me. My son immediately took my granddaughter into the house. I asked my daughter-in-law what was going on. I didn't expect my son to turn around and kneel directly in front of me. At that time I thought I was hearing things and ignored it, but then the voice came again a little later. It was really my son's voice, so I got up the courage to go to the door. I took a look through the door mirror. I didn't realize that the person really looked exactly like my late son, but I didn't dare to open the door. Then I called my daughter-in-law to call her home, but when my daughter-in-law came back, she said there was no one outside the door. I immediately went out to look again and again. It turned out that there was no one there. As I was turning around to go back to the house, I suddenly saw my son jump out from behind the door, with his sleeping daughter in his arms. Then he immediately took my granddaughter into the house. I asked my daughter-in-law what was going on. I didn't expect my son to turn around and kneel down in front of me and say, "Mom, I'm sorry. I came back late. I couldn't see my brother off for the last time, so I came back to take care of you for my brother." At this point, I didn't know what to do. Then he continued to explain, "I'm your son Jerry. Don't you remember me?" Then he took out a thin rope. Seeing this rope, I couldn't stop the tears from flowing out of my eyes. I remembered back 30 years ago. I remember when my family was poor, I couldn't afford to buy a necklace. I specially asked for a thread from door to door in the village. I wove a rope. At that time, I was born with twins. Jerry and Jim each had one rope. At the time, my neighbor Susan and I were very close, and we talked about everything. But not long after I gave birth, her baby got sick and died. And then she started to get a little unhinged. But she continued to love my children, especially for my oldest son, Jerry, probably because he was the same age. She often thought of Jerry as her own deceased child. Looking at Susan like this, I couldn't bear to tell her the truth. But one day her husband came to our house. He knelt in front of our house for a day and a night. He wanted us to give Jerry to Susan, because by that time, Susan was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She was getting sicker and sicker. Although my family's living conditions were not good at that time, I refused his request outright. The baby was my life. Not to mention the neighbors. Even if it is my own sister, I will not give. But what I didn't expect was, they took advantage of our work in the field. They came to our house and took Jerry away. When my husband and I came home that day, I found that Jerry was nowhere to be found. So we immediately called the police. But in the end, there was no news. No one knows where they went. Just a few days ago, my granddaughter was hospitalized. My daughter-in-law accidentally met Jerry in the hospital. At that time, my daughter-in-law was shocked. She later found out that he was her husband's brother. It turned out that Susan had recently told Jerry the truth. Jerry was not her biological child. All these years, his adoptive parents treated him like their own, but they died one after another not long ago. Susan, The adoptive mother also told Jerry about his life when she was dying. Jerry was told to come home to identify his family. Later he met my daughter-in-law in the hospital. The two of them planned a surprise for me, and that's how Jerry came home pretending to be Jim. I looked at my son in front of me. I was overwhelmed with emotions. Whether he was Jerry or Jim, they were both my sons. I'm thankful that God, for not taking away all my hopes.